One of those people in your time at Aroa was Paula O'Toole.
Paula O'Toole, legend.
So we've got Paula in a couple of weeks.
Coming on the really?
Podcast. So tell me something about Paula.
Paula's an absolute champion. Yeah. Absolute champion. It's such a delight.
I had wanted to get into business information systems. I didn't make that course, so I went for computer applications. I failed programming, which was Pascal, because Apple is in Cork, as a lot of other tech firms are. Yeah. Repeated it for a year and passed it with C++, and then decided it really wasn't for me. So I dropped out of that. So ironically, after all these years, I end up back in IT. So
yeah, I was going to say, I hope you didn't tell anyone in your interview process that you're a failed programmer. Yeah.
He was less concerned that I wasn't techie tech, and he kind of convinced me. Well, showed me the way of like that I didn't have to be techie tech.
It's your kind of big first step up in leadership.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
How did you prepare for that?
I didn't, I don't think. I just went up there and got it done. And that's what I loved about Brightstar, was that kind of fast pace, and it was just like, get in there, get it done. You didn't really have time to stop and think too much. Yeah. I ended up spending a lot of time with tech people. And in fact, in that last role, the APAC role, I was the only non-tech person on level 1 of this building. Yeah. So where all of IT sat. So by virtue, I absorbed a lot there as well and learned a lot from the IT.
It's been an interesting era, let's say, because there's been a lot of non-tech people that have been able to move into tech.
Yeah.
Even as failed programmers.
Yes, exactly.
And today we are thrilled to introduce Paula O'Toole, an energetic and visionary CIO and transformation leader, known for driving digital transformation that aligns seamlessly with business goals. Paula's impressive career spans multiple regions and industry giants such as Brightstar, Untitled Foods, Aroa, 4PL and Timberlink, and most recently with Ausfine Foods. Her expertise lies in operational and IT strategy, with standout skills in strategic planning, digital strategy and technology leadership, making her a key figure in modern business transformation. Join us now for an inspiring conversation with Paula. Yes, so Paula, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You've had what I'd probably describe in a positive way as an unorthodox journey through your career into being CIO and now where you are as COO. But I'm really looking forward to learning about that path. Yep. Because it's been interesting how you kind of started out in supply chain and the transferability of those skills and kind of moved into tech. And kind of obviously where it's going to go next as well.
Yep.
But before we get there, we're going to turn back the clock. And I think, to quote Ed Sheeran, you're a Galway girl by the look of things.
Cork girl.
Cork girl, sorry, but you went to Galway University.
I did.
I think
did,
so.
Yes.
HR and logistics.
Yes, you couldn't major in logistics at the time. It was only an offer as a minor. So I tried HR, and then I tried to get into HR for a few years in Ireland, and no one would have me, which was probably a good thing. Yep. It's the world telling me. And I ended up falling into logistics, as a lot of people do, just as something to kind of pass the time. I ended up staying there for many years.
But what made you pick that course in the first place?
I liked the idea, but it was a female lecturer to start with. There weren't many of those back in the day, and she was doing logistics, which was also super interesting as well. And it was all I knew about logistics was that it was kind of predominantly in the army or in military circles, and that it was having some applications in business and manufacturing. So it was kind of interest in that way, just to understand how those two were kind of meeting and how the business world was benefiting from those military skills.
Had you always kind of planned on going to university?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I had actually originally started in computer applications.
You're right.
I had wanted to get into business information systems. I didn't make that course. So I went for computer applications. I failed programming, which was Pascal, because Apple is in Cork, as a lot of other tech firms are. Yeah. Repeated it for a year and passed it with C++, and then decided it really wasn't for me. So I dropped out of that and went and did a BCom, which was the HR and logistics. So ironically, after all these years, I end up back in IT. So
I was going to say, I hope you didn't tell anyone in your interview process that you're a failed programmer. So if I kind of look at your LinkedIn story,
yes,
it looks like you kind of graduated around 2001.
Yes,
if I got that right. And then there's a 6-year gap, and then you pop up in Melbourne.
Yes.
So of course I'm a curious person by nature. So what was kind of going in those 6 years?
I was in Cork. I was doing logistics with a friend of mine. So I was working with Matrox, who are a graphics card manufacturer, and they kind of had a light assembly plant up by the airport. So I was helping them. They had a massive RMA, or returns backlogs. My friend worked there full time, and she was like, "Can you come and help us during the summer to do that?" So that was my first foray into logistics, and stayed with them for quite a few years, and then ended up moving to Edinburgh for a while. So did some system transformation stuff within Edinburgh's two banks merging, so I was consolidating a lot of accounts, which was really not very riveting work. And then ended up going travelling for a few years around Europe. Met my husband, who's Australian, met him in Ireland, and then we made the move over here. And kind of really started my career from here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Were you kind of keen to get away from Cork and explore the world, or was that reluctant?
Yeah, no, I was always keen to go. I'd done a few summers in the US, which is pretty common for Irish students. You kind of get a working
Camp America,
visa.
That kind of thing?
No, just you get a working visa where you can go and work for 3 months and travel for a further month. So I'd done Boston and New York for summers, and I loved it. So I really liked the idea of big cities. Cork has a population of about 350,000 people. Dublin at the time was about 1.2 million, so it's very small. So I just really enjoyed that big city vibe. And Australia, as an Irish person, is kind of another rite of passage that, you come over to Australia and you do your year or two working visa. And the plan was I'll come over for a year or two and we'll see how it goes. And that was 2003 and I'm still here.
20 odd years later, you're still here. It's interesting. I read somewhere actually recently, an economist, a guy called Scott Lancaster, and he was talking about, not Scott Lancaster, that was someone we had in the show. It's Scott Galloway. Scott Galloway. And he was saying that the best thing you can do for your career if you're young is move to a major city. Yeah. Because it's where the most things are happening.
Yes, and there's more opportunity and choice.
More opportunity. And if you're really good in a small city, you're probably capped out with your limitation. Now, there's probably not advice that people get when they're young. Yeah. But if I just listen to what you just described there, even you spent time in Boston, in Edinburgh, in New York, you've ended up in Melbourne. Yeah. You've kind of got away and you've kind of explored the world in order to probably further yourself. Yeah, and I think being Irish is kind of in our blood. We're everywhere, right? So we have been for centuries. We go everywhere. And I think certainly in my family as well, both particularly my mum's side, they travelled a lot as kids. And it was definitely something that was always on my radar to get out and see other things and experience other cultures and worlds and big cities. Yeah. Yeah. Do you miss home? Sometimes, but not always. I think as I get older, I kind of have more of a pull back to it. But, it would be nice to go and spend summer there because that's when it's nice. The rest of the year, it's pretty miserable. So, but no, not mostly. Australia's definitely home. Yeah, great. So I kind of mentioned the LinkedIn story. So it picks up 2007 with you joining Brightstar. Yes. Where you spent the next, I think, 6 years. Yep. Or so. So who are Brightstar? What was that role about? So, actually before that, it's probably not on my LinkedIn. I'd done Virgin Mobile when I first got here, and then I did 3 Mobile, and then I'd worked with a couple of guys at 3 Mobile that moved to Brightstar, and they got me to move over there as well. So it was, Brightstar was it's a South American company originally, and they got the contract with Telstra to do all of their warehousing, 3PL, procurement, device management, all that kind of thing. So. Yeah, so we ended up being an outsourced provider for them for all of their logistics and supply chain. Yeah, great. Yeah. So what did those kind of roles look like, those early roles, and how were you building your career? So I started out in the warehouse in Sydney, because I was in Sydney when I first got here. Yep. And for that role, that was kind of inventory management for all of their stores, for the Telstra stores, and managing the inventory levels there, for availability while keeping stock levels low and things like that. So working there, and then we were setting up in Hong Kong. So they asked me if I would go up and help out in Hong Kong to establish with a new customer up there. Did that, and then they moved me back here, so I did more roles here with them, and so it was quite a long journey I had with Brightstar, and then I left for a couple of years and even went back again. It was a glutton for punishment. So but it taught me a lot, Brightstar. I'm we were very much it was kind of a consulting, but very much in the service delivery side. So we were constantly having to stay ahead of Telstra. We had to have continuous improvement roadmaps. We had to be demonstrating new services, how we can improve and enhance their end-to-end supply chain. So it was a very not competitive, but very fast-paced environment, and constantly trying to stay ahead of our customer, and then to replicate those services across to other telco operators within the region or Europe or US. So I got a lot of exposure to traveling and service design and building in there. And those services were in terms of distribution of mobile phones, things like that? Yeah, but it was kind of like when supply chain was really becoming a thing, and that's what I loved about supply chain, was that
it wasn't a core competency back then. It was very new. As I said, when I was at uni, it wasn't an option to study supply chain. It wasn't around. It's a core competency today, but back then it was really businesses were kind of coming to grips with what supply chain was and how supply chain could really help your business, and understanding the handoff points from sourcing all the way out to the customer, and then sometimes bringing it back again for reverse logistics. And in those days, I think having an external party to kind of facilitate that end-to-end supply chain and the handoff points to ensure that the functions were talking to each other was quite a valuable value add, I think, for bigger companies, particularly like Telstra. So we were very much in there trying to help them to kind of get their supply chain to flow through and make sure the right people, that they were looking at the right data and the same data, and also that the right functions were talking to the right people at the right time.
It's also one of those things, and I'm not an expert in this, certainly any stretch, but I look at Australia from a supply chain perspective. It's incredibly different to anywhere else in the world in terms of the geographical spread of where the major cities are based, in terms of the connectivity, in terms of what that looks like. If I look at Amazon, even as an example, still relatively new to the Australian market, which amazed me when I came here that there was no Amazon. But then when you think about it, Amazon's set up in the UK, in the US, and in these places where there's that connectivity of supply chain. It just makes their operation much easier.
Yes.
But doing that here is so much more challenging.
I think it's two things. I think we have the geographical thing, but there's not also a lot of competition in the Australian market when it came to logistics. There was a couple of big players. No one wanted to do Sunday deliveries. No one wanted to do same-day deliveries. So a lot of people in supply chain logistics were super happy when it was announced that Amazon were coming here, because we were like, finally, someone who's kind of going to shake up the market here and really focus on the customer rather than, hey, this is how we do things. It's deliveries 5 days a week and we'll tell you when it's coming kind of thing. So.
But economically, same-day and Sunday delivery is very expensive to deploy.
It is, but I think also not everyone wants a Sunday delivery or same-day delivery, and I think that was always the assumption. And I think the customer was never really engaged by the logistics groups within Australia to understand that. And I think when people started looking at same-day delivery, it's like, no, everyone's going to want it same day. Well, in fact, if you actually ask most people, they're happy to get it the next day or the day after. They just want to know for sure that it's going to arrive when you tell them it's going to arrive, and that they don't have to wait around all day. Remember those days when you had to ask to work from home to stay there to sign for something? So, it's... just having that certainty, I think.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned in that time, 2009, you moved to Hong Kong.
Yes.
Just reflecting sort of off the cuff here, the places where you'd relocated to previously were all, let's say, English-speaking dominant. Hong Kong is probably just after the British handed it back.
It was just before, actually.
Just before. I'm trying to think when that was. I thought it was 2007. Was it later than that, 2010?
Maybe I've got it wrong. I thought it was
later.
You
live there.
I think it was a bit
I'll
later.
take your judgment on this one for sure. That was going on, though, around that time.
Yes,
But whilst it was kind of, I don't know, British occupied, British run, it's still a different culture, still Asian culture.
Yes.
How did you sort of adjust and adapt yourself in that situation?
I think it's the same as in any situation, really. You just talk to people, you understand their lives and what drives them and what motivates them, and understand what culture is like there, and try to really kind of be mindful of that and plug into that, and not kind of force your own values and situations and stuff. So I think it's just you have to be much more conscious to take more of a backseat and to listen a lot more than what you would in a straight English speaking environment, for example. So you just got to allow for different cultural differences, for language barriers and things like that, and just be a bit more cautious in the approach.
Because that's probably the key thing, right? Things are only going to get done according to the local customs.
Yeah, exactly.
Not according to your experience and training from another part of the world.
Yeah, correct.
You're going to impose.
Yeah, so no matter, for me, it's like no matter where you are, if you're trying to mobilize people and get people to work together to achieve a common goal, then that's the approach that you take.
Yeah. And you were there as director for supply chain.
Yes.
Again, this is an assumption just based on your LinkedIn, but it's your kind of big first step up in leadership.
Yes, it was,
How did you prepare for that?
I didn't, I don't think. I just went up there and got it done. And that's what I loved about Brightstar, was that kind of fast pace, and it was just like, get in there and get it done. You didn't really have time to stop and think too much.
Yeah.
But because I had been quite close and I'd had with the supply chain team here in Australia that had been working on the Telstra account, and I was part of that as well, then it was pretty easy for me to kind of just take that and transpose it up there. It was a much smaller telco, much smaller environment, but it was way, way faster. So we had to adapt our operating rhythm significantly up there because of the speed of the market up there compared to what it is down here.
And that's just a natural speed, or is it a kind of customer or differentiator?
That's just Asia. Like they just run at a faster speed. I remember when I came back to Melbourne and started working in Melbourne, I felt like no one was working. I'm like, what is everyone doing? You know, because up in Hong Kong certainly, and most other parts of Asia, they go at a fast pace. They run pretty quickly, so you got to keep up. Yeah.
Did leadership come naturally to you?
I think so. I think I'm the youngest. I've got 2 older brothers, so I've constantly been navigating and playing the diplomat in my family. I think, I've spoken a bit about this with other friends as well, and it amazes me how often I come across people who are number 2 or number 3 sibling, and we're quite similar in how we work and our style, because you're just used to constantly negotiating and which sides do you take and how do you navigate, who do you depend on and who don't you. So I think that kind of plays, that is helpful, I think, in the workplace when you're used to a family dynamic like that. So I think I think maybe it did. It was just easy for me, and it's easy for me to talk to people and build relationships. And I think from there, as a leader, it's just really identifying what people are good at and then also where they want to go, and then you can kind of help them get there. So I think if you take that approach, then I think leadership, that's what that is, and it's just really facilitating and working with people.
Yeah, interesting. It also sounds like you were in a good environment and a good business with people that you trusted and trusted you. Yeah. And I think that makes a big difference when you first go into a leadership role. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think I was very lucky, like certainly in Virgin Mobile, when I was first in Australia, it was true Virgin culture. No one had offices. I could stroll up and have a chat with the CEO, the COO, anyone you like. Everyone was accessible. You could ask as many questions as you liked. So I had a good learning experience there. Yep. And Brightstar was quite similar. It was pretty flat structure, but there wasn't really the hierarchy was there, but it was very informal. So yes, you did have access to other things. People were very willing to share. Everyone wanted to get in on things. It was a very creative kind of solutions-focused, customer-focused business. Quite dynamic.
Fantastic. After sort of 15 months, 18 months or so, you returned back to Australia?
Yes.
Was that part of the plan? Was it going to be a short stay?
No, I had planned to stay up there a bit longer, but my husband couldn't find work up there. It was the GFC was actually what hit when we got up there, so it was challenging times. Yeah. I would have liked to have stayed up there a bit longer, but it was time to kind of come back.
Yeah. Look, sometimes there's practical reasons for those things, right? That's it. And you returned as supply chain director for Australia.
Yes.
Was that a bigger role?
It was a bigger role, so that was also kind of appealing. So that was like looking after all of the Telstra accounts. So whereas I had reported into that role previous to Hong Kong, I then took that role on when I came back. So that was a bigger role. It was a larger leadership one that I'd had. So we had 3 warehouses at that time in Sydney. Yeah. So we had a forward warehouse, forward logistics, reverse logistics, and we had a Brightstar separate for our own business outside of Telstra as well. So there was probably about 400 or 500 people there. So it was a very interesting business, and we were just getting into the reverse logistics market there as well. So where you kind of trade in your iPhones and devices. So we were very much at the forefront of bringing those services to operators as well, and facilitating the back end of those so that they could offer those propositions to their customers. So that reverse logistics piece was, it was very interesting, and it was a very different way of doing supply chain that hadn't really been done in that industry before. So it was a good challenging role, and always working with Telstra is always great and challenging. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having a large leadership remit there, and having that business expansion component, as well as creating that new supply chain from a reverse logistics perspective.
Yeah, great. And after in 2013, you left Brightstar.
Yes.
And joined Lion.
Yes.
I think GM for logistics optimization.
Yes.
So how did you know it was time to move?
I felt I needed to get out of telco for a bit, and I felt for supply chain, to be worth your salt in supply chain, you need FMCG experience. So I deliberately went and sought FMCG experience, and that was when this role came up the line. And it was good because it was more logistics focused rather than supply chain. People kind of use the term supply chain quite loosely, but I had always been very inventory focused, and with in telco there's not a lot of manufacturing. There's light assembly kind of piece, so it's pretty much basic logistics. So I needed to go out and get some FMCG experience in manufacturing, and thought that the logistics optimization role would be good because it crossed over IT, finance, safety, security, and on the sites and the network design and things like that. So there's quite a few. Yeah, it was interesting.
So in that context, you're looking at both the kind of input of raw product as well as the output of finished product and getting it to the distributor or the store or whatever.
Yeah, and it was dairy, so time is of the essence,
really
kind of thing,
fast-moving.
but very variable as well. And had my experience in dealing with unions and things like that there as well, which is also a big part in logistics that I hadn't been exposed to before. So it was a great role and a good opportunity to give me exposure to lots of areas that I hadn't had experience in within the logistics space. Yeah,
interesting. And how did you find it? Because you've gone from a business that you're really familiar with, and you spend a lot of time in, the people, the characters, to suddenly you're into I'm assuming Liner, a relatively big kind of multinational organisation. How did you find your feet?
Kind of slowly, I guess, but I was probably a bit more tentative than I would have been in an industry that I was familiar with. But I think that was good, and I did, because it was an optimization role. I nearly had that license to be able to stand back and just really go in and seek to understand and see what was going on and build my knowledge around different areas to see where we should be focusing for optimization. And I guess it also gave me my first kind of experience into a bigger, more multinational corporation. So, HR were very present, culture was very present, it was very important. Line were very, very strong on that back in the day. I'm sure they still are now, but I don't know. But back then it was very much a big thing, and they were at the forefront of that, and that appealed to me, having studied HR a while back.
Yeah, of course.
And because in a Brightstar we were kind of fast-paced, it could be a bit loose at times.
Yeah.
I kind of enjoyed learning and appreciating different, like, those structures in a more formal environment. It was good for me to get exposure to that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you could probably make the argument to go on into a bigger career, you kind of have to have exposure at some point to bigger corporate life.
Yeah.
To understand, I don't know, let's call it the game.
Yes.
It's a different game.
No, it is, yeah. And it's different players, and it's a more longer term game typically. And you had to take things, and you had to take different angles and different approaches, rather than being very direct and smaller to medium size, which is, or dynamic businesses, which is where you can afford to be. You can be very direct, which I'm pretty good at. But in bigger corporations, you got to sometimes figure out, navigate that. Sometimes you got to go a bit more softly, because you're not too sure you're going to upset. And it was quite good. But I really enjoy the people side, I think, because getting to understand how they performance management, the values, instilling that, the culture, employee engagement, all of those kind of things, which I'd learned about at uni but had never really seen in practice per se. So that's what I really got to, I guess that kind of made me tick a bit around the people side and the value of all of that, and kind of focusing on the not performance management, but actually just having goals and objectives and helping people with their careers, and really having those day-to-day conversations about, hey, how are you going in the role? Are you enjoying it? Are you not? And where would you like to go? And just really that really I really enjoyed that part, and that's when I kind of learned that I enjoyed that leading piece, and I wanted to take a bit more of a, not formal, but a more specific and different approach to it than I had previously, I think.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I moved here 2016, and I think one of the things that first hit me from a business perspective was I love that they called HR people and culture.
Yes.
I had never heard that anywhere else in the world.
No.
At that point. I don't know now.
Yeah.
But at the time, and I've been in the US and South America and Europe and so forth, never come across it.
Yeah.
And I thought that's actually such a better than human resources. I mean, it's very, very
Lion
transactional.
Lion called it that as well. It was the same. It was like, it's
a good, and I think as a result, probably people and culture is further along here in terms of the human element.
Yes.
As a result, so it would have been interesting, having studied it, to then see it in action, but in a different country, in a different culture as well. Yeah,
I think so, and I think, like, what people are what make the world interesting, really, right? So it's and you need to get anything done, or whatever you want to do, whether you're having fun or working or traveling, it's all about the people, really. Either the people you're doing it with, or the people you're going to meet when you get there. So that's what it's all about. So, and I think and I think as leaders, that's really important, to make sure that we're helping people advance in their careers. I've been very lucky. I've always had good sponsors and people who've kind of said, supported me and gone, you should step up and you should go and do that over there. And so I really try to lead in the same way, and help people, if they make it clear about where they want to go with their career, then I'll help them get there if I can. And so it's very, and that's the bit that makes it a bit more meaningful, because getting the right people in the right roles, then you can really get things humming. Yeah,
100%. Right, it's all about the team, and every business probably that's succeeded in history has been about the people, not the product.
Yes, correct.
The product probably wasn't going to succeed if it wasn't for the people that were behind it. So.
Yeah.
after about 18 months, a couple of years there, you returned to Brightstar.
Yes.
You sort of joked earlier, a sucker for punishment, I think is how you described it. I actually did a LinkedIn post about this today.
Okay.
Because I read an article in Harvard Business Review, and they were claiming from their research, and it was US research, that of the people that quit, so not the people that resigned, but the people that quit, sorry, they did resign, not the people that were let go, the people that themselves made a decision to quit their company during COVID.
Yeah.
They reckon over 20% of those people returned within 3 years to that organization.
Wow.
And I thought,
That's interesting.
I just don't see that.
No.
I look at a lot of resumes, a lot of LinkedIn profiles, and one of the first things that I always look for is, has somebody returned to somewhere they worked previously?
Yeah.
Because for me, that is a really good sign about that person.
Yeah.
That they didn't burn, they didn't
Bridges.
scorch earth when they left. They maintained relationships, and they had unfinished business, and they had the strength of character to go back and do that.
Yeah.
Whereas most people, you see this human nature of, I'll never go backwards.
Can't go back, yeah.
It's such a narrow-minded outlook.
Yeah.
So I think it's really great. You say sucker for punishment. I actually think it's really awesome. But so how did it come about? And what kind of made you go back?
Well, I guess it was the role that I'd always wanted when I was there previously, but the person that was in the role wasn't going anywhere for a while, and I knew that.
Yeah.
So I kind of felt that was probably, this was a good time to go and get experience in other industries and do other things.
Yeah.
So I still kept my contacts there, obviously, and kept in close touch with them, because we were all very good friends, because we worked hard and played hard together, kind of thing. So it was good fun. But yeah, then it was my old boss who had then been in the US. He'd moved on over to the Brightstar in the US, and then he reached out to me and just said, "Hey, the role's come up if you're still interested." And that was the APAC role, which I was definitely interested in. As I said, I was always keen to get back up to Asia, but it was going to be based out of Melbourne, which was good as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely something that I couldn't pass up. And I think sometimes, my career's been made of that. You just get like blindsided by these opportunities every now and again, and it's never the right time. But you've just gotta go with them.
Yeah. You got to back yourself in those situations. And as you say, if it was the role that you always wanted, why would you not go and do that role? And you've still got a great relationship with the people you worked with, and no doubt you've left. You've got the experience at Line. You've learned something different, something new. You're going to come back better. Yeah. With a different perspective and contribution to have. And it was a massive step up. I think I read that you were managing over 600 people. Yes,
because I still had my old role. So the old role that I was doing still reported into that. And then I was taking on up in the region as well. And we expanded out into about 5 or 6 countries as well. We'd also taken on India in the region as well. It was a big role, big remit, big geography, but it was a lot of fun. And we were basically establishing a lot of that reverse logistics and mobile phone refurb, as well as the other services and solutions that we were doing. So we were just expanding into different markets quite quickly, and having to get operations stood up pretty quickly. So it was good fun, and getting teams built in those areas, and it was good fun.
Involved a lot of travel?
It did. So I was probably up there every other week.
Wow.
Yeah, and I lasted, I think, about 3.5 years, and I think it was I was maybe 3 months out of the role, and I realized one night on the couch, I was like, I haven't fallen asleep on the couch tonight. Because I used to just always fall asleep on the couch.
Yeah.
It was work hard. It was a lot of travel. It was exhausting, but it was really, really great. Yeah.
It makes you feel better. I do that and only commute to Melbourne. But I've always actually wanted to ask someone this. Do you have to get like an extra large passport when you do that much travel?
Yes, I did. Yeah, back in the day, but not anymore. So for all of the,
I love a stamp and a
visas
passport
and stuff, I know.
I remember going through Europe with my wife, and because she had an Aussie passport, they'd stamp her passport.
Yes.
Can you stamp
You would never get one,
So I remember being, I think it was at Dutch immigration, and they were looking at me a bit strange. I was making them stamp my British passport. But it's not that we're competitive.
No, of course not.
But I wanted the stamp as well. So I think I read through that time as well, you started to get exposure into technology.
Yes,
and there was a bit of a kind of transformation. So was that something that you were kind of leaning into and looking for, or was it just kind of luck of the draw?
I think it kind of, I like to build things, and I think you can't build without tech. And I think supply chain and IT, I kind of describe are quite similar. As I mentioned earlier, supply chain was a new kind of concept. It then became kind of more of a core competency. And then I kind of shifted my attention more towards, to actually make supply chains work and be effective, you needed solid tech underneath, and it needed to be really well integrated. And your tech strategies had to be very closely aligned. So I think within Brightstar, because we were always trying to stay ahead, And often there weren't tools out there in the market yet for what we were doing. So we actually built a lot of tools in-house back in the day when that was kind of cool and you could.
Yep.
We wouldn't do it these days. But yeah, so we used to build a lot of those tools. So I got a lot of exposure to IT and working with them and kind of doing agile kind of building of products as we were kind of creating the services and delivering them for customers. So, and particularly in the reverse part as well, there was a lot of tech that we had to do to be able to track that at a serial number level, which a lot of WMSs and other systems weren't capable of. So yeah, I ended up spending a lot of time with tech people. And in fact, in that last role, the APAC role, I was the only non-tech person on level 1 of this building, so where all of IT sat. So by virtue, I absorbed a lot there as well and learned a lot from the IT.
Do you think being the one non-tech person on the floor, do you think that helped or hindered you?
Oh, it definitely helped, and I think because we were delivering so much together anyway, up in the region with a lot of these new countries we were deploying, it was absolutely key that we were kind of co-located and very much joined at the hip. So yeah.
Okay. Well, was there a moment through that where you kind of thought, maybe tech is now my next step?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was. I think we were going through an ERP and WMS upgrades and kind of templating for the region to roll out and upgrade. And it was at that point that I was kind of, we weren't completely aligned as a business and an IT from a strategic perspective. And it was kind of then that I started to see the cracks and kind of go, that this can go kind of two ways. And that's when I really learned the value of like that the tech and the business have to be so aligned in those strategies. Yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, it's been an interesting era, let's say, because there's been a lot of non-tech people that have been able to move into tech.
Yeah.
Even as failed programmers.
Yes, exactly right.
And able to be incredibly successful because you've come from understanding the business problem.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've maybe got a bunch of tech. This is a massive generalization, but a lot of people that have come up through that tech path that haven't got the business exposure.
Yeah.
So really being able to blend those, I think, has been a good time and a good opportunity for many people.
Yeah, and I think that's where I found my niche, to be honest, is just being that kind of translator in the middle between business and tech and vice versa. So I was able to communicate what it is that the business needs and then speak that to tech and get tech's concerns about that and speak that back to business and really kind of get that communication flowing between the two so that we could make sure that we were kind of hitting the mark and aligning on what it is that we were delivering, rather than, sometimes tech would get excited and go and build something and then come back a month later and we'll go, we've moved on. So, we actually changed that a while back. So yeah, because it was a very agile environment in Brightstar particularly, then it was really imperative that we were very close with the IT team and working on that delivery together.
Yeah. And you on leaving Brightstar, you then joined Aurora?
Yeah.
Aurora. I always struggle to say that. There's too many O's and A's and
too many R's. Yeah.
So
that was packaging.
Packaging. That's right.
Yes.
And you went in as you were in a role there as head of IT.
Yes.
Did you go in as head of IT?
I went in as business partnering, so head of IT, but for the procurement and supply chain and logistics.
Got it.
So from IT, from Brightstar, I guess, because I'd always still been in the supply chain, that's when I was like, I need to go and spend time in IT, and I need to go and actually manage IT and get really in there if I want to kind of continue down this path. So that was why I kind of took a sidestep and went to Aurora and met Matthew Perry, who was my boss there. He's a great guy, and he really sold it to me. So in the interview, it was more, I guess I had the perception that, finance and HR business partner, why doesn't IT business partner? So why doesn't that model happen with IT with the business? And he pretty much said, we're saying the same things in the interview. And I was like, okay, so this is where I need to be. I just enjoyed his passion and his vision for how IT should work and should work with the business and be integral with the business. So that was my first formal foray into IT. And I was very fortunate to have that reporting into Matthew Perry at the time. So
I don't know if I've got this completely wrong in my head, but did Matthew send you some wacky gift to get you to accept the offer or something?
I think it was yes, he did. I think it was Tim Tams.
I was going to say Tim Tams. I had Tim Tams, and I was going to say that. It's very Matthew. But
yes.
So how did obviously you made that connection in the interview, but how did he then sort of support and mentor you and enable that development?
I think his view was very much, you had to get out there into the business. He was less concerned that I wasn't tech. And he kind of, convinced me, showed me the way of like that I didn't have to be techie tech, and that really kind of integrating that into the business, understanding those roadmaps. So working with the functions to get their roadmaps, understand their pain points, and really make sure then that we were kind of focusing on that. So he was very much like, go and explore, go and have conversations, be curious, and above all, look outside. So go and talk to other people in the industry. Similarly, go and talk to IT vendors, see what they see, and just really get out there and see what's going on around within the tech landscape, within our industry, outside of our industry, within supply chain, and really kind of just go out and be curious, and then bring that back in, I guess, and kind of be that kind of thought leader really for the business around that tech piece, not defining what they need, but at least kind of going out there and researching and kind of understanding. So you can go back to the business and go, so have you thought about this, or have you thought about this, or we see that this is a bit of a mess over here, and you guys have been trying to fix it for a while. Do you think maybe we could go and talk to this vendor? They might be able to help us. So really kind of consulting nearly, but actually a part of that delivery as well. So so he just provided that freedom to be able to, and encouraged to be very curious, go out and look, and kind of collaborate rather than just kind of come up with a design, build something, and just hope that it works and hand it over to the business kind of thing. So,
great. Yeah. What a great way to learn tech.
Yes,
by the way.
It really was. I was very fortunate.
You've really got the whole field there to play with.
Yes.
And to look at and probably be able to test things, trial things.
Yes.
Kind of look at maybe a product and think, this looks great. You take it back to the business and they go, nah, because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're kind of getting that instant feedback as well.
Yes.
As you're kind of building out that breadth of knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it was kind of more, because Brightstar, we were more of a service delivery. So we never really did tech for ourselves. It was always for a customer and for delivery. But Aurora it was tech for ourselves. So it was a different lens and a different approach to it. So, you had to kind of take a longer term view to make sure that it would work, and that it would work in 2 years. Or if it didn't, then what is that roadmap and that path to kind of keep it current and up to date. So
and I don't know much about the packaging industry, but I'd imagine that it's probably some margin pressure in terms of being able to deliver value and efficiency, and it's not a high value product.
No,
it's a volume product, I'm assuming. So it really does come down to how quick and efficient can you produce that stuff.
Correct.
So I'd imagine that would have had an impact in what you were doing from a tech point.
Yeah, it did. And I think, and that was another thing I learned from Matt as well, was, there was always pressure. It's like, just take 10% off your budget, that classic that IT always get, just reduce your cost by 10%. And, I learned from Matt, we had actually, as well as the roadmaps and the functions like that we were partnered into in the business, we had those costs kind of broken down. So we knew exactly what the cost to serve the supply chain and the procurement team was, and what that looked like. And so we could actually just hand that over and kind of say, well, this is actually what it costs to run tech. So if you want to cut 10%, then just tell us what you want us to stop doing, and we'll stop doing it. So it just creates a very different conversation. I think in that low margin industry, that was one of the better learnings that I'd had. And I think, and this is where I always bring it back to supply chain as well. What I loved about supply chain back in the day, was that, I used to say to people, people are like, what is supply chain anyway? And it's like, well, milk doesn't come from the fridge, right? There's so many things that happen to get milk to the fridge. That's supply chain. And I think there's an element of that in IT as well. There's a lack of understanding of the effort and all the other pieces that need to align from a network, from architecture, from hardware and your software and everything. They all need to align to be able to deliver something. And there's a lack of understanding and comprehension of how deep that can be at times by business stakeholders, so that they can just say, just cut 10%. It's like, well, you can't just quite cut 10%. So it's a different, so that's what I enjoy, I guess, is imparting that knowledge back to the business, going, well, no, that's right. This is how tech works. This is why it costs this much. And this is why we have to pay these costs. And this is why we have to have these foundational things to be able to do other things. So it's quite similar to what we were doing in supply chain 20 years ago, I guess.
But again, it's an interesting lesson there in managing upwards to your stakeholders too. And getting that exposure, and being able to provide that degree of education, and probably, there is a bit of mystery around tech, let's say. So there is an unknown, but it is a chance to educate. And how do you take some of these pretty technical concepts and turn it into layman's terms to get the cash that you want to do things?
Yes.
Because full well that if you don't get the cash, you don't put that things in place, something's going to fall over down the track.
Yeah.
And then the finger's going to get pointed straight back at you. And it's very hard to say, well, you cut my budget 10%.
Correct.
No one really wants to hear it was your decision
Yeah.
in the past that caused this.
But that's why the road mapping is important, right? So that you're really partnering with the business and understanding what their pain points are. So then they can actually advocate for you and kind of say, well, no, we do need them to deliver that roadmap. It's what we've agreed and it's what's in our strategy and things like that. So that, you need to kind of build those advocates within the business to kind of support your spend and budget, really.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose there's also on the flip side, there's a lot of, it's easy to spend money on tech.
Yes.
If you're not careful.
Yes, it is.
And kind of over engineer what you're trying to do as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably the right thing from a board to be saying, do you need this much money? Rather than the cut by 10%, but to challenge it, right? Yeah. Because it does give good rigor to the business case and the business needs.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't go too far.
Yeah.
And there is a fine line between the two. But again, I think for anyone trying to develop a tech career, it's learning that communication.
Yes, it is.
It is probably going to be an enabler to success in the future.
Yes, yeah. You've got to be able to impart that tech and the importance of it and the value of it in layman's terms. And particularly, the higher you get, the less technical knowledge there tends to be. So when you're dealing with boards, there's not much. Like, you're very fortunate if you have someone who has got a technology background on the board. It's happening more and more these days. But yeah, that can be a real void, and you've got to really adjust your language and subtly educate them without making them feel silly for not knowing that already. So
But I think there's I can't think what the kind of psychological term for this is, but there's this kind of notion that someone with a small amount of knowledge thinks that they've got a lot of knowledge.
Yes.
A little knowledge is and I kind of hear this from CEOs sometimes where they'll say, the board director flying down from Sydney read an article in Harvard Business Review about artificial intelligence, and I get to my presentation, they want to know, can you write me a paper on this and what's our strategy? Because they read an article.
Yes.
And it's that's also the dynamic of being in tech.
Yes.
Everyone kind of is looking to you to make sense of this, and the small amount of knowledge can be relatively dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that's a good opportunity though, right? Because at least people are coming to tech now to understand and explore things more, whereas before that wasn't the case, right?
Yeah.
Tech in the basement kind of thing. So I think it's good. It's finally come to the forefront. I'm like, even when I was at uni 20 odd years ago, it was, tech was everything. It's the backbone, and then 10 years ago, it's like, we're going to plug and play. It's going to be so seamless and so easy. And we're probably only just kind of getting to that now. And it's still not fully seamless and fully easy, but it's, I think it's definitely more prevalent in people's minds now that we are going that way. And I think when we talk in business as well, I often talk about building tech capability within the functions. Like, it can't just be IT that run tech. We need to have people who understand tech from a finance perspective, from a sales perspective, from marketing, from HR. You need to have people who understand what good systems look like in those functions, because IT can't be masters at all of that. So it's definitely where we need to go, that we'll be kind of coming into more of. Obviously, there's the core infrastructure, networking, cyber, even data, all of that, kind of keeping that secure and running and stable is obviously core to an IT function and their responsibility. But all the other pieces above that is really how you engage with the business and how we kind of help the business to deliver what it is that they need to deliver.
Yeah, definitely. I think almost the label of tech is too broad and homogenous in some ways. Yeah. As in everyone works in tech to some degree these days. It's
correct.
just the degree of how technical you are, let's say, is probably the differentiator. And it probably does need some kind of sub-classification into the different fields that you work in, be it cyber or development or data or projects, or, as you say, business partnering in finance or AI, wherever. But there's definitely probably a requirement, and most companies will these days call themselves a tech company that does.
Yes.
So Tesla is a tech company that makes cars.
Yeah.
Aroa, I still can't say it, is a tech company that does packaging.
Yes.
I'm being facetious. I'm sure they don't say that, but that's the kind of way of the world now.
Yeah.
And tech is kind of seen as the business enabler.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, but to your point, small amount of, or what we've been talking about, small amount of knowledge can be very dangerous.
Yes, it can be.
If misapplied, and suddenly you end up with multiple parts of the business all wanting their own systems.
Yeah.
I was talking to an organisation recently, and they had 148 applications across the organisation, and not a big organisation.
Okay.
And of course, everyone wants their own application.
Yeah.
But that's a technology nightmare, right? How do you make all that hang together? Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's EMMBR, LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.